Welcome to the Lifeline, a production of Simply BJE. The goal of this podcast is to build, inspire, and to empower our listeners through conversations on business, leadership, and mental health. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at www.simplybje.com/the Lifeline. Now, let's tune in for today's episode. Top of the day, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Lifeline. Last week, we talked about identity collapse. We talked about divorce, depression, self-auditing, therapy, emotional intelligence, and rebuilding. But this week, we're taking it a step further. It's one thing to rebuild. It's another thing to ask yourself this question. Are you actually qualified for the life and the love you say you want? Because desire is common, qualification is rare. We're glad to have once again storyteller, filmmaker, songwriter, mentor, and teacher Deshaun Davis with us in our studio. So welcome back to the show, Deshaun. Let's get into it. So as we talk about this whole conversation about desire and qualification, a lot of men desire marriage. A lot of men, they want peace. They want success. But desire doesn't equal readiness. So how does a man know the difference between wanting something and being qualified for it? Talk to us, Deshaun.
That's a very good question. I think about just in the natural, I want a Bentley, right? I want a Bentley, but if I don't have the credit, right, to qualify for a Bentley, then I'm gonna have to enjoy my Honda Corolla. My Corolla. I'm gonna have to enjoy something that I qualify for. And the reason that is because credit shows capacity, right? It shows a pattern. So our wants are something that we have to always qualify based on what we've done to put us in position to walk into those different desires. We can have wants all day, but your qualifications are going to be connected to the patterns and the stability that you've had, what you've demonstrated over time, and that then gives you the confidence or the knowing that, okay, this is something that I can maintain. So it's like want has to be connected to what do I have the capacity to maintain? And a lot of these guys get into these cars that, don't even realize that if you don't take the time to maintain these vehicles, then you break the vehicle, and it wasn't the vehicle. It was where you prepared. So I think we have to examine want against what are we qualified for to put us in a better position to manage those things that we desire.
Yeah, that's good, man. And so, from a man's perspective, you know how we are. Sometimes we think we're ready when we're really not, right?
Yeah.
And so, let's talk about that. What are some signs, that a man is not quite ready, even if he really thinks he is?
I mean, well, we go back to the book, we go back to Genesis, and we kind of look at, okay, what was this man doing before she came along? He was working, right? And there's something about that process of working that was preparing him to understand what it means to manage something, what it means to oversee, right? So he was working. And then if you look at it, it talked about, you can see that there was a relationship that he had with God too, because he was communicating with God before she came up. So I think some of the fundamental things we have to have is we have to make sure, do I have a connection with my value that's connected to me producing something in a work environment, because that's going to give me the skills I need in some regard to better manage this relationship. But also, what is my communication with God like? What are the fundamentals that I have anchored in my life that prepares me to be able to communicate to someone else a relationship that I have with God? Because if our source, now we know people have a lot of different approaches to how they pursue certain things, but I'm going to give you the pursuit and purpose from what works for me has been an anchored position with God that allows me to have a foundation that can give me certain qualifications for believing what I think should happen, right? So if you don't have those kind of things in place, I think you end up putting yourself in a position to where you're kind of just guessing. A lot of us, that's kind of how we've approached relationships, and we kind of get into some of these situations, and we just expect by osmosis that we know what to do or know how to handle these situations. But I think you have to put some of those fundamentals in place first to really consider yourself ready to engage in an entire culmination of two people. That there's a miraculous thing that happens to bring two people together, and it definitely requires you being ready from the standpoint of, am I right with God? Do I have patterns in place that has shown that I can add something else to my life and be successful in managing that? And until we get it to a place to where we've seen those things, we've got to be cautious about how we enter into relationships or engaging with another person.
That's really good, man. And I'm glad that you touched on those things first, because typically when we think about readiness, oftentimes it's all about the material things,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
you really dove in last week and said, hey man,
Yeah.
relationship is way more than that, because it's about sustaining it. So can you talk to us maybe even some practical things about once you're in a relationship, the
Yeah.
things that are going to be required before you enter in, one of the things you mentioned, capacity earlier, being able to
Yeah.
have hard conversations and stuff like that. Talk to us about some of those things that determine readiness for
Yeah.
a relationship.
Yeah,
Mm,
I think you have to, we have to, like we talked last week about, learning to learn. Like
mm,
I think there's a case that can be made for us being prepared for a relationship. What does that look like? What
yeah.
patterns, that are connected to our readiness. It's like, I tell people often that, if you meet a person and they have a history of failed relationships and you're giving them a chance, you've got to be able to point back to what makes them think this is going to be different this time. Like, you take a person like me, you've gone through divorces, and now you feel as though, okay, no, you're the one. No, don't, no, you're the one. Like you finally at this place where you're convincing somebody else that they're the one for you. You have to be able to point back to what have you done that's caused you to have a greater development of skills to prepare you for this time. And if you don't have those mechanical, things you can point back to say, here is what I did, here's what I've learned to overcome those things that caused me to have a deficit in my preparedness. If you can't point back to something, then I think you're revealing a pattern that's going to continue to repeat itself. So being able to recognize that it's important for me to have, a sequence of situations, circumstances that give me the confidence that I have learned and overcome those things from the past is critical. Or for if it's from therapy to having hard conversations to being able to talk to somebody else that has had a pedigree of success in that thing you haven't succeeded at. Those are the mechanics of a mature person that is trying to approach this situation from a vantage point of, I didn't have all the right tools in the past, but this time I want to make sure that I'm fortified with the tools to be able to be successful in this relationship. So I think we have to look at those things that we didn't have before and be able to replace those things. For me, my therapist clearly told me, she said, hey, how do you ever expect to have a positive relationship if you haven't had a pattern? If you haven't been up close in proximity to somebody else's success to learn from, what makes you, where you going, where, I ask this all the time to people, like, where'd you get that from? Where'd you learn that? What are we pointing to that you can say, this is what I am trying to emulate to grow into something that changes what I had before into something that is desirable and it's fruitful and it's sustainable.
So,
That's good.
you started off with a great point about the desire for a Bentley, and you touched on credit. And what I teach people when they buy cars is the total cost of ownership. So when you think about marriage, is more than just starting off with the attraction. You got to think about what that looks like in totality. Um, One of the best teachers is experience, and you have some experience with marriage and divorce.
Yeah.
So after divorce, how do you know when you healed and you're not just lonely because you want to move on to the next relationship? And how long should a man truly sit to rebuild? I know you did 7 years
hmm
completion, but how long? What does that look like?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll double down on something for you, and I'll give you something else to consider. I've heard people say experience is the best teacher. I think evaluated experience is the best teacher.
I think it's one
I
of the
can have
best.
I can have some experience,
Mhm.
but if that experience hasn't given me something that I've learned from, then that experience was not teaching me good things, right? So I think that's a part of what you have to have a mindset towards is I can go through something, but what did I learn from what I went through? Can I look back at what that experience was and audit it and piece by piece examine where did it break down? What did I contribute to this? And when you're talking about someone that's going through that have went through divorce and their healing process, if that person is talking about everything the other person did wrong, you ain't ready. If everything is about she was crazy, and that woman didn't know, and I did all these. If the introspective view of that relationship isn't highly about what you did wrong, chances are you are missing the aspects of what broke down in that relationship.
Right.
And I guarantee you, if it's all about somebody else, you definitely have stepped away from your position of leadership because a leader is going to take responsibility.
Mhm.
A leader is going to say, hey, this is it's on me. Where there were things that contributed to us getting to this place. But a lot of times the fractures in a marriage is a result of the lack of development of the husband. If you're not prepared to be able to lead her with tenderness and care and also something that she's willing to follow, then we've got to back up and start to inspect what inside of us is fractured, right? So when you talk about development and time, it's all going to be connected to the degree of what happened in the marriage. If you was out here, slanging it to all of the women in the world on the side pieces, and you got these situationships and hidden things, and you're married, and that broke down your marriage, well, we got a lot of things to deal with and unpack before you're gonna be ready again. I tell people all the time, if somebody cheats on you, you've got to understand that they cheated on themselves first, right? And most times they're not really cheating on you; they're cheating on themselves. And so if that person has consistently lied to themselves, consistently lived pretentious and created all of these optics that were never true, then they've got to face those things before they're going to be be ready for a new relationship. The one thing I believe, marriage is a revealer, right? I mean, you can believe certain things about yourself, but when you live with a woman, she is going to help you see those things that you don't do right. And if you're not prepared for that kind of confrontation, if you're not prepared for that kind of accountability, then your lack of preparedness is going to tell you if you're ready or not. Because what prepares you and what gives you that timetable, which I think you should just take timetable off the equation and just start to work on yourself and say, let me examine what happened in this relationship that caused me to lose interest, that caused me to stop being as attentive as it was necessary. Where did those gaps begin to widen? And if you can't evaluate that, then getting into another relationship is just going to be a cycle that you'll continue. What I saw, as I told you last week, in my marriages before, was I continued to produce the same result. I continued to live in the same cycle because I hadn't stopped long enough to realize what was wrong. I don't think that there is too much time in between you getting a divorce and you being prepared for somebody else. You got to do whatever it takes to convince you that you are healed, that you're whole, that your mind is renewed, that you're not bringing into this relationship baggage from the past. Listen, if she's got to come into the relationship and deal with the baby mama drama that you haven't figured out, you're not ready to put somebody else into your circle. You've got to get to the place to where it doesn't matter that you had a tumultuous past or that you've had difficult things in your past, but if you haven't managed it properly, if you haven't gotten to the place to where she's not walking into an ambush because of your lack of development with what you walked away from, it's not time. You do better to take time so that you don't have to presuppose that she understands all of these things she's walking into. When my wife and I got together and we began to date, we had some very serious conversations about my past, and I had to show her a pattern of wholeness in my past, of connection to, the tough conversations. Let me explain to you how I handle my ex. Let me explain to you how I handle my children. Let's walk through this and make sure that that's okay for you. But if you're not ready to have those conversations, if you're walking into it, say, yeah, that's those my kids. You know what I'm saying? We ain't got to worry about those. We ain't got to. You're not ready for it. You got to come in when you're ready is when you're ready to be completely naked. When you're ready to expose everything you've been through. When you're able to really just open up your heart in a vulnerable way and say, I am bringing you now into a safe environment because I've managed this. Until that happens, take time off the consideration. Just to say, we're not even going to worry about time. We're going to worry about, let me make sure that I have created an environment that is safe for her to come into.
So creating that environment begins with what you talked about last week. That's the self-auditing, right?
100%.
So if a man or woman listening today wants to engage in self-auditing, where does that start? How does that begin?
I think it starts with really understanding what it means to be honest. What does it mean to be honest about myself and where I am? Because until you get to the place to where you can recognize what you don't know, I think one of the best things ever be or do in life is finding that place of our weakness. Like, can you look at yourself and say, this is what I'm not I'll just expose us. Just be, can we be vulnerable on the show today? Can
Come
we
on.
be
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, open up.
Like for me, okay, my past, and my failures in my own development make me have certain kind of parameters and boundaries that I set up for my life when it comes to women, right? So I am very conscious of myself around other women. Not because I am nervous or not because I'm not in love with my wife, but because I've consciously created these boundaries that won't allow me to manipulate myself into these situations that become difficult for me to manage. Right. So that goes all the way down into, who works for me, who's close to me, and as a counselor, as a mentor, it's going to be hard pressed for you to ever find me alone with another woman. Right. I'm not going to be counseling her by myself, in some closed environment. I'm going to be very transparent. I'm never going to be meeting with some woman that my wife doesn't know about. I'm never going to be, engaging in these conversations with someone that is inappropriate. All of those things are techniques that that you create around yourself as you understand what's going to prepare me for the future. That's part of my audit. That's part of me understanding I am looking at my past and I'm recognizing my shortcomings and I'm making conscious, deliberate decisions to create boundaries so that I don't fall into those situations in the past. You don't just up and slip up into an adulterous relationship. One time I did a study on just the practicalities of how many decisions you have to make to commit adultery. There is so many decisions that you made. You don't just wake up one day and say, "Where your drawers? Where my drawers?"
Right.
That doesn't happen. There are so many decisions that you violated along the way. That's why the Bible tells us cast down thoughts. If you in a hotel room and y'all snuggled up, it's too late to cast down the thought, right? It's time to flee, right? Why? Because you bypass the thing. Your brain ain't gonna work in that situation because the environment is prepared for something else, right? So the thought level is where we can maintain these decisions, and that's when it's a subtle thought, just a consideration for something. That's when you got the power to say, God, I take that thought, I bring that thought into subjection, and I command this thought to think the right thing. Like if you're not fighting at that level, then you're not prepared to audit in honesty. So as honest as you can be, you've got to be able to see clearly what derails your mission. And you've got to understand the value and importance of preparing yourself to be that real with yourself so that you can communicate where your weaknesses are. My wife and I talk about my weaknesses. When we first start dating, we expose them. This is the auditing process. Hey, here's where I was, where I slipped up in the past, right? Here's where, I get distracted, and for me, I'm not going to say my distraction because somebody might don't be out here taking notes. I ain't going to tell these women where I have a weekend, but there are things I had to expose to my wife. Listen, this is my weakness. This is what I have to watch out for. This is what I have to be concerned for. And if you're dating the right person, they're going to have the wisdom to listen to you, to become a partner with you about those things, so that you guys can together ward off those distractions, right? And so that's what I mean by that. That auditing process, it's got to start with a honest, pure, clear approach to the things you've done wrong, the things you weren't prepared for in the relationship that caused you to not have the right tools to be ready for the ever evolving process of managing and being in a relationship with someone that you're growing with.
Man, that is powerful. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about that verse in Job, because as I was just thinking about the word governance. I'll say that first. When you were talking about positioning yourself, that's one of the characteristics of manhood, is the ability to govern yourself. And I was just thinking about that scripture in Job. He said, I made a covenant with my eyes. How can I look at another woman lustfully? You see what I'm saying? So I think that is very powerful. So, and so when you start to talk about self-auditing, that's really a growth model to start, growing towards a certain intention, towards a certain direction. So, what's probably some of the hardest question, or maybe the hardest question a man must ask himself if he's really serious about growth?
Wow, that's good. I'll go back a little bit. I was stuck on what you were saying about guarding your eyes. I tell my guys, I said, listen, the battle is when we're not together. It's easy for me to put on a good face when you're in front of me, right? It's like Sunday morning, right? We all know what to do on Sunday morning. Isa. Oh, Eba, who's got two? We know what to do. We know how to act. But I tell my guys, I say, hey, if you happen to see me and I didn't know you were around, just watch me. And I said, I got $50 for you every time you see me look at the backside of another woman. Like if you ever see me do that, if you ever see me cut my eyes when she walks by, if you ever see me, looking up and down some woman, just holler at me. I got 50 for you on it. And that's not necessarily a cocky approach. That's me saying, I don't want to lose $50. I want to maintain my disciplines so that I don't, and when you really are honest with yourself, if you put a cost factor in front of the decision you make, you're going to find out how serious you are about correction. If I tell you, if me and Petaway say, hey, listen, we about to go in the gym. He said, all right, you better be here in the morning. Oh man, I'm ready, man. Let's get it. I'm about to. Okay. He says, all right, if you're not here by 6 o'clock in the morning, it's going to cost you $100. That's you become a whole different kind of person when the execution of what you're saying you want to do is going to cost you something. Right. And what in your life are you doing? So to your point, I think we have to get to the place to where we set up boundaries in our life that we know is going to force us to be accountable. Right. In every area of our life. And I think that there are stages that we have to be honest with ourselves in that regard, to where we're constantly putting these things, these guardrails in our life that force us to be better. I want to be better, right? I don't want to just be status quo. I don't want to just arrive at a certain place. I want to be better. I want my wife to be the fruit for the efforts that I put into her, that I can see. I want to be able to look and see her peace, her safety, her ability to feel confident that I am the one for her forever. I want that to always be something I see, right? So that in order to do that, I've got to make sure that I'm putting these parameters in place that allow me to stay conscious and intentional. Because the first thing that goes when you get common with people is your intention, right? If the moment you lose respect or lose purpose in this relationship, bye-bye goes the intention. And then that's when you start to communicate a lack of focused effort. And then people start to feel as though I'm not your prize anymore. right? So I think we have to be, really conscious about how we approach our growth and development to the point that we are very intentional about the decisions that we make to get better. And that again, that goes back to the first thing I said. That's going to require honesty, right? It's going to require us really saying, okay, I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll let you pick it up from here. Like, a lot of times I like to ask guys this question, which tells me a lot. Who can call you and tell you what to do? Who in your life can tell you what to do? And we create these worlds that make us absent from structure and order, and we live our lives without any submission to somebody else. And part of the thing that I did in my relationship to give confidence that I had learned from my errors is put people in place that says, hey, babe, if we ever get along this road and it sounds like I'm acting crazy or cuckoo or you're not getting through to me, here's a phone number you can call to this person we've identified that you can tell without any reservations what I'm doing to bring correction. Ooh. These are things that we aren't taught to do. What person can we call and say, this person can tell me what to do? This person I am submitted to. And you learn a whole lot about a man if he's not submitted to somebody. If he doesn't have somebody else that he's yielded to, tells me a whole lot about what he's learned about order and what he's learned about submission. So if you haven't found yourself in a position to where you have a pedigree of submission to somebody else, I question if you deserve somebody submitting to you.
That's good, bro.
But yet we walk into these marriages expecting this authority and respect to be given to us, and we don't give it to nobody else. We have no pattern or no tenderness towards the way we are to people, yet we want them to give us this type of treatment. But if you can't, even talk about self-auditing, you might be sitting there right now and thinking about this and it's resonating in your heart. Go back and start to ask yourself, who do I listen to that can tell me what to do? I'm not talking about I'll consider what they say, but who have I positioned in my life that says, if I am off, you can tell me what to do. I will yield myself and trust the God in you to adjust myself accordingly. Until we get to those places in our lives, we are living our lives reckless, and we don't have the right parameters in place that are going to get us the benefit of what the Bible talks about, which is that safety that comes with the multitude of counsel. That safety and security that comes because we live our lives in an ecosystem of protection because we are not our own Holy Ghost, right? We have people around us that allow us to be corrected. And I think in that place is where we start to find growth that comes when we don't know the things we need to change.
You said a whole lot there, brother.
That's a whole lot. And this, so check this out. So for our audience that's listening and watching, you sound like you got to figure it out. Okay. You sound like your experience has taught you what to do and how to do it. So how did you know that you were evolving and not just becoming good at self-help? How did you know that you were actually turning into the person that you wanted to be? And then at what point does growth show up in your patterns and not just in your posts?
Good
That
question.
was good, Professor.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. For me, I had a mentor tell me something one day that he thought was encouraging, but it was really a diss on the side. He said, Deshaun, I'm glad you've become the person you've always wanted to be.
Or the person
you finally become that person you've always wanted to be. It's like you've been putting on this face of this guy, but I'm glad that now you're him, right? And I think for me, you recognize that growth is happening by being honest about what's real fruit. Like, what is real fruit? And we lie, especially people in my industry, man, we lie to ourselves all the time. Preachers too. Preachers will be, hey, I just started this church. Yeah, doc, we just started this move, and God's doing great things. We 50% more than we were last Sunday, man. This is 1 week. God, okay, you have two people now.
That's
You
growth.
had one person. You got two people this Sunday. But we're going to cast this vision as though things are really moving. No, if you can't be honest, let me tell you something. When I years ago, I felt like, there was a call in my life to start a church. And we started this ministry, and it was a definite learning experience. I remember the first couple Sundays, you sitting there looking out the window, you looking at anything that moves, hoping it's coming into the doors. You're like, is that? No, that's a cat. It ain't coming. No, that ain't. Is that something? You hoping anybody go come in here, right? You just wait, and then people start coming, things were growing, and it was interesting, but at a certain point, I saw that things weren't growing like I thought they should, because I've been around ministry that was productive, and I kind of understood what it should do. If this is God, then it should work. If it's not God, then I'm not about to make it God. So at a certain point, we felt like we were going to shift the ministry. So we moved the ministry to another city, and people said, we want to go with you. So we had 5 families that said, hey, we want to go and be a part of this. I said, all right, we're going to have a meeting. So we all had a meeting. I said, bring your loved ones. Let's talk. I said, I want you guys to know that I believe this is what God is saying to do, but I'm going to give it 1 year. I said, if in 1 year we get here and we don't see the fruit as in people being ministered to and it's affecting their lives, if we're not seeing families restored, if we're not seeing, a result that we can look and say, hey, this is the hand of God that was moving because of our obedience. If we can't see that in a year, we out.
Now,
Right?
did you make that
honesty.
timetable, or did God give that to you? That 1 year. Where did that 1 year come from?
Honestly, I believe it was my timetable. I believe it was something that I decided. And the reason I decided is was because I kept myself open to say, okay, God, lead me throughout this process. But I believe God gives us these intangibles that say, hey, I'm going to give you the word, but manage it. I'm going to give you my assignment, but I need you to manage it. Right. And so I remember sitting in there, man, that day was coming. And the night before, it was Easter would have been our 1 year anniversary. So the week before Easter, we came in there and man, we had a packed house. I was like, all right, God, wait a minute. Okay. Looks like God's speaking. And I met with my team a week later. It was a Saturday before Easter. Now, if people came on the week before Easter about to be popping, right? Because we know everybody come to church on Easter. Everybody like, this is God's day. We all come. So I'm thinking, okay, we're really about to find out. So I met with my team on that Saturday. I said, listen, guys, I told you guys 1 year, we're going to judge it. 1 year, we're going to be honest before God. We're not going to make this happen. We're not going to, be sitting here trying to make something happen that his endorsement hasn't shown consistently. I said, so let's see what's going on. Now, here's the thing that happened. Couple lessons. My team was prepared all year. So nobody's heartbroken. I've been teaching them how to be accountable to the right direction all year. So everybody's heart was open. We were all excited to say, let's see what God is going to do. And so that night I told him, I said, okay, let me go for God. I said, God, hey, we're going to service tomorrow. Continue to show me what you're doing. I want to do what you said. I want to be led by you. And the fruit I was seeing in my life didn't match up to God's hand on my life. My marriage was in trouble, and it just didn't seem like God's hand was on it. So I said, let's show me what's going on. Let's see. And I told everybody, hey, listen for the message on Sunday. We'll know what we're doing. We got there Sunday morning. And I got ready to minister. And remind you, last week was out the seams. It was crazy, for a new church, only a year. We probably had a little over 100 or so people there that Sunday before. That's you moving some numbers, right? So we get in there that next Sunday, and I get up to minister, and I look out there. And there's probably 3 people in the audience. And I looked down and looked at my team. I started writing on my notes. I said, guys, I feel led to shift my message. Today, we're going to talk about transition. This is our last Sunday.
Wow.
And so I talked to them about transition. That was the last Sunday, and we shut it down. Now, that was very hard to do, but I have always told myself, if I'm auditing myself, audit the good, audit the bad. But you have to have a pattern that you can compare it to so that you know what is real. Because if you don't have a pattern to understand what's real, then you constantly will live in this place in your mind that's tricking yourself, to what real fruit looks like. And this applies to your relationships. This applies in business. This applies in every decision you make. If you don't have a pattern before you get out there moving on what thus saith the Lord, if you don't have a pattern to measure it against, then you're going to find yourself doing what the Bible helps us through to understand. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. A lot of us are depressed and discouraged because we put this fake sense of accomplishment in these deferred hope. This deferred hope, and we're walking around with these feelings that we can't explain. But if you can point back to it and really look at it, you'll see there are things that I've been doing that have proven to have no fruit attached to it. But my ego won't allow me to let it go. My ego won't let me realize that it's okay to make an effort towards something, but it's even better to know how to reverse, correct, adjust, and go back and say, God, okay, what did I miss? What can I do better to learn what you want me to do next?
Man, that is so powerful because, I think a lot of times we tend to put so much onus on God and not understand that we're responsible to think through things, right? And be accountable to certain things. So I love the fact that you're talking about, hey, I know this is what I heard, but hey, this is maybe for this season, and now it's time to move on, because when you start thinking about scripture, the cloud didn't stay, it moved.
100%.
You see what I'm saying? So you got to be willing to go there.
Yeah, to that point, there's a difference in hearing God. There's difference in having heard God and hearing God. You may have heard God, but are you still staying sensitive to what he is saying now? That if you don't hear him, then you would have heard him say, go sacrifice that boy. And then you get up there to do it, and you're not hearing in the same process. You go stop the whole plan from happening because of your lack of mobility in your connection to what God is saying. Because a lot of times God is speaking to move you in a direction so that you're prepared to hear the new instruction. But if you get stuck on something, I see a lot of people get stuck, even medically, or that they diagnose it, fight, flight, or freeze. I see a whole lot of people frozen in this God told me or this previous career. They're stuck in this style. I can look at some people and say, you stuck in the 70s, bro. We ain't wearing that jacket no more. What are we doing? Right? You know what I'm saying? And so people get that way mentally too. They get stuck on a success. I know guys that, the first thing they say when you meet them is, I used to play with the Broncos. Bro, that was 30 years ago. It was 30 years ago. So we have to be able to shift into the ever evolving thing God is doing in our lives. And then we're going to start to taste fruit and fulfillment. But I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I mean, so you said exactly what I was hoping it was going to bring out, which leads to this next point I wanted to ask you about, because we always talk about emotional intelligence. But just listening to what you said, there was a lot of discipline in there, and emotional discipline as well. So let's talk about that. What does emotional discipline look like in a man, and how important is it?
This is a tough one because we're not taught this. Where do we learn this? You know what I'm saying? Where do we learn? We're taught to be a man, be macho. We're not really taught how do I manage my emotions, And so for me, this was probably the most difficult thing to understand, and even more challenging to learn how to do effectively. But what again, I go back to the same thing before. What allowed me to get to the place of tackling this was the confidence in being honest, and learning that I can be safe in my truth, right? And learning to be able to just say where I am, to say, you know what, I can look at these relationships, and what honesty will produce. You'll communicate like this. I look at my relationship, and I can see that I am insecure. I am not okay with myself, so therefore, if I'm not okay with myself, the natural reaction is for me to overcompensate. So I'm going to try to be something I'm not because I'm not okay with myself. So the emotional discipline in that approach is for me. If I can be honest about that, then here's how I communicate to my partner. Okay, listen, I'm dealing with some insecurities. My insecurities make me react, and I kind of overcompensate. So can we talk about some of the triggers that happen that make me do that? Okay. And so she says, yes. Okay. So here's what I need. Whenever you see, whenever I see something that reminds me of where I should be in life and I'm not, then that's going to trigger me to feel a certain kind of way. So can you reach out for me if you see those moments? Right. So the next time we're in these situations and this person around this person and we see their level of success, that makes me feel bad because I remember now what I didn't do and why I'm struggling. So this is a discipline. So when I learn to communicate like that, it starts to calibrate me to a degree to where my overcompensation starts to come down because I'm gaining control over it by being honest. I'm getting and you do that over time, you'll get to the place where it's just how you communicate. My wife and I talk like this. We've got a way that we communicate about where we are emotionally. I'll come in, from a meeting or something. I said, babe, I'm about at a 30% today. She'll say, okay, hey, you know what? I'm doing good. So I got you. And what am I saying? That's me communicating. I need you to, give me some grace today. I need you. And that's an emotional regulation. That's me saying, I know I'm learning to be in tune with my mood so that I can prepare the atmosphere as I recover. Right. So that's me communicate. So that discipline. And when you get to the place to where you're just, you decide, I don't want to be an emotional wreck. You start to communicate differently to prepare your world to understand where you are, and nobody knows until you tell them. I don't know where we get this, attitude that everybody should just know what to do. You should just know how to treat me. You know what I'm saying? No, tell me how to treat you. You should just know. That's why I'm gonna get it wrong because I don't just know. However, if you tell me, I can learn and I can be more attentive to continue to repeat these things that you want me to do. But I'm not going to just figure it out just out of thin air. So I think we have to really slow down and listen. I believe every person on the planet needs a mentor, right? And that's different from the pastor relationship. That's different from a coach's relationship. A mentor is going to be really close to those decisions that you make in life. And the closer they are to you, the more you will be able to have a real tangible eyewitness to your development, which hopefully produces a truth and an honesty. So you can, because the best place you can ever be in, bro, is seeing growth. When you look up and say, man, hey, guess what? I was at the mall the other day. The dude came and he stepped on my shoe. I didn't punch him in the face. Growth. Right? Or, that person that came and said something to me on the road, that was mine. That was my issue. The road rage, bro, sign me up to the class, okay? Because I was the guy. I'm going to chase you all the way to your house, okay? I don't cut me off, So, okay, I digress. But I've learned how to realize that, hey, when that trigger pops up, I see it. And it to this day, even that example, after working through a whole lot of effort to be better, I still have to guard myself from somebody triggering me on the road. I still have to remind, I feel it like it was like I've never felt it before. Boom, it'll hit me, and I've got to grab it because I believe there'll be more accidents and injuries on the road if we didn't have a horn. Because that horn, it lets me get it out. Okay, all right. I've now at least been able to express my frustration. So, but that happens though. It's going to continue to happen. We're never going to arrive, guys. We're never going to get to the place where all these things are managed to perfection. But the greatest thing we can do is to be aware of them, to be aware of our weaknesses, aware of our shortcomings, aware of these things we got to grow and develop into. And that emotional intelligence rises the more we are aware, more we become vulnerable, more we become clear about our shortcomings, and the more confidence and courage we have to say, you know what? I'm no longer going to ignore these things are happening. I'm not going to act like I'm somewhere I'm not. I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to cast all my care over on God. I know he loves me. I know he cares for me. And he's going to walk me through these things so that I don't continue to have these pitfalls.
So, men, we have different roles in marriage. We are the priest, provider, and protector. And you've been through a couple different marriages. Let me ask you this. What carries more weight long term? being financially set and providing, or having emotional maturity. Because if the bills aren't getting paid, then that can bring other stresses.
Yeah.
I don't care how much emotionally
Yeah.
mature you are.
Yeah, bruh. Yeah.
So what's more important between the two? And then the second part of that, can a man build wealth and still bankrupt his home emotionally?
Whew, that's good. That's good. I think it's about alignment. It's not about one or the other.
Mhm.
But I think your emotional stability is important first, because your emotional stability will help you understand what those priorities should look like.
Not
You know,
stability, maturity, meaning you're mature enough to handle, I guess, because, in marriage, you have different words that come back and forth, and you might
yeah,
want to retaliate or win the fight instead of being emotionally mature enough to just, you know,
yeah,
step
yeah.
back.
I mean, I think, yeah, because I think the goal is never win to win. You know what I'm saying? The
Mhm.
go, yeah, like Steve Harvey said, you can be right or you can. You know what I'm saying? It's like where are these goals? What or do I want to win? Listen, when you get to the point to where you and your wife are talking about something and you like, let me get on ChatGPT. I'm gonna show you you done already
Mhm.
lost. Like
Yeah,
it's not a fact finding relationship, right?
relationship,
But
right.
I think you have to. I think when you have that emotional compass in the right place first, it helps you understand things like, I now know why we don't have enough at the end of the month to take care of our bills, right? But if you don't have that emotional stability and maturity in place, you make excuses because you don't have the confidence to be vulnerable to admit that, okay, I don't know how to manage this, right? So when you have your internal workings in the proper alignment, then you'll be able to really own up to what you see in your financial picture. I'm very clear about my role as a breadwinner in our home, and I know also what I'm not good at. I have learned to become a better manager of money. I've learned how to have a better understanding of how money works, but that's not my strong suit. My strong suit is making income. My strong suit is the ideas behind what draws, what makes something valuable. My strong suit is creating revenue, creating concepts, but the management of it is something that I don't do as well. So when I was looking for a partner, I wanted to find somebody that covered my weakness. There's
Mhm.
somebody that their strength was weakness. So now I employ my weaknesses. So people that are around me, are most of them, you can clearly see how advanced they are in areas that I'm not.
Yeah.
But my emotional stability allows me to respect those people and not make them need to feel as though that I'm superior, right? But our ego, our lack of emotional development is that thing that makes us quiet the noise of the greatest wisdom in our life. If you're not hearing from your wife, if you can't hear from her and evaluate her opinion against your decisions, then you're showing yourself where your emotional IQ is,
Mhm.
right? Because that person that knows you the most is going to have a whole lot of information that you really could benefit from if you had
Mhm.
ears to hear.
Wow, that's good. That's good. So you talked about ego, right? And you didn't say the word, but you really talked about it. And
Mhm.
really, the way that you fight ego is humility. And
Mhm.
so, a lot of times when we think about leadership, we don't think about humility. What does leadership look like when it's not driven by dominance?
Mhm.
Whew.
Mhm.
I don't think kind of leadership by dominance is leadership. You know,
Mhm.
um, I think it's just it's when we try to lead with emphasis, or we try to lead with bravado. I think that's all based in a place of insecurity. Leadership to me is done well through inspiration. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower. A good leader can get other people to do what he wants them to do when he wants it done because they want to do it,
They wanna do
right?
it.
So
Mhm.
I think leadership is more, I don't instruct my wife, I inspire my wife. I'm not her authority. You know what I'm saying? And I think we have to understand that the greatest thing you're going to get out of people is when they have bought in, right? When you have inspired them. And I think it's simple from a fundamental standpoint. A lot of what becomes natural leadership is demonstrated through your personal sacrifice. I mean, when you see me working hard and you see me doing my part, it should be a motivation of what you should do. And I think that's, I told one of my guys one time, he said, man, I can't, I come home from working so hard and, she don't got the house all clean, stuff everywhere. Kids got toys all over. I've been working, I just can't understand why she don't, what I'm supposed to do with that? I said, I got the answer for you. I'm telling you, Brian, I have heard from the Lord. I got the answer. You got the answer? What am I supposed to do? I got it. You ready? I'm ready. What is it? Clean it up yourself. Clean it up. I mean, if you have a problem, that is so unbearable and you can't handle it, clean it up. Mm-hmm. What is that doing? That's a different kind of leadership. A leader that recognizes if I'm not content with the way things are going, the way it's going to fall is back on me, because I'm also going to examine if they haven't done their part, then maybe I haven't been clear in my ability to inspire, to get them to the place to where my inspiration now is something that they want to participate in. So I think we have to be really sensitive to what leadership means is the buck stops with me. When it's all said and done, when everything, if everything was falling apart, I'm going to take the load on me. And I'm going to be a leader through my service, not through my dominance. Because I don't care. People can do what you say out of fear, but they're not going to be around too much longer. Mm-hmm. If you're leading out of fear, it's not going to be something that's going to create an inspiration from somebody that wants to follow you because they feel as though, you've created a safe place for them to do so.
I think a part of leadership should reflect confidence, meaning the people that you're leading are confident in you. If you're a leader at the job and the market is going up and down, your employees should be confident that you're making the strides to try to put them in the best position to be successful. What that looks like in marriages for a woman is safety. So how can a man honestly evaluate whether his wife feels safe with him? Not just financially, not publicly because he's walking in between her and the street, but emotionally and spiritually safe.
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think her safety is going to be demonstrated through her willingness to tell her truth. And I think you will always have a gauge on how safe she is by how real she can be. I know this is a family program, but
bring it on, bro.
If you're having your marital relations with your wife, can she tell you what wasn't good for her? Mm-hmm. Can she explain it to you without your ego being crushed? Right. How good can you ask that question? Was this good for you? And can she respond from a pure place without you got the frog face on for the rest of the day, because you could, you're going to learn those kind of things. You want to know where you are, how safe she is. Ask her questions about, how do I, when you have a problem with me, do I make it easy to tell me? When you're frustrated with my attitude, how does it affect you? And the more, if she can't comment about that, you'll know as a thermometer, you can kind of gauge her true safety, because she should be able to, this doesn't take away her desire or need to mature to the way she's communicating her truth in love. And we're not talking about that, because that's something that we've got to also, recognize that our truth shouldn't be raw. Our truth should always be communicated in love. I can tell you your breath stank, or I can hand you a mint and smile at you. Mm-hmm. Right. One way we're going to get it across. So, right. So there's a responsibility there. But I think her safety is going. If we slow down long enough, man, we're going to really understand that that woman can evolve into something so beautiful when she's safe, And the way we're going to learn that is, can she be honest with me? Can she tell me her truth and feel as though I'll hear it without weaponizing it against her? That's going to help us understand how safe she is.
So,
Man.
fellas, you hear that? It's communication and her honesty. Her communication and her honesty to you. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. I was just thinking about a book I was reading. It was just talking about one of the three major responsibilities of men, in a relationship: to be able to respond versus react, to provide structure, and to create safety. And that's really what masculinity looks like inside of a relationship. That causes a woman to feel safe, and that's when her power comes forth, which I think is great, man. So, man, you're hitting on some key things, man. So, as we're kind of bringing this into the home stretch, I want to talk to the men out there. If a man is listening right now and he has, unresolved issues, maybe it's dad or unresolved child support, you've mentioned some of those things, inconsistency. What does his next 90 days look like, as he gets on this journey of growth and self-development and emotional maturity and things like that? What would you say to him?
Well, I think you first have to, during that auditing process within yourself, you gotta know, first of all, what can I handle? What am I able to manage in another relationship? Before we get to the 90 days, we got to ask ourselves some questions. If you're not, if you don't like, if you don't have patience and you don't have the time to slow down, then you probably don't want the lady with a child.
Mm.
If you're contentious and you fight all the time, you're probably not going to want to be in that kind of relationship, because you have to have a skill set to know how to handle his father. Right. And so you just got to examine yourself. When you look at these situations, you got to look at it in its totality so that you can walk into something eyes wide open and not think that the relationships are just falling apart because of other things. It could just be because you're not aligned properly or prepared for this, which brings us into, how do I prepare myself for the 90 days? It's like, guys, first of all, you got to understand that the guy's not surprised. God's not surprised by where you are. And so if he's not surprised, provision is already there for you to find your way out. He's got answers for you. Supernatural things will happen, but they won't happen until you bring it to him. And bringing it to him requires honesty. You got to realize that you don't want a woman to love part of you, because that's going to turn into something that you resent. You want her to love all of you, and it's possible. She can look at everything that you have, everything that you've done, and find a way to be there for you and be a support to you. But you've got to first understand that my honesty is what's going to open that door. And then after you get to that, you've got to start saying, okay, over the next several months, I want to start to itemize these things that I want to attack so that I can not pretend that they don't exist. Because at some point they're going to rise up, and they're like these time bombs that tend to sabotage everything you've worked for, when you might as well just put it all on the table so we can start combing through those things. And God is so faithful that when you can be honest enough to present those things before him, there's supernatural things that start to happen as you can, clarify that you trust God to be your source and not the pain and shame from these things that you've experienced. And by opening up yourselves and explaining those things, God will meet you right there. And then he'll put you in environments like around, and people like listen to this podcast, or things that you just say, how did I end up stumbling on this? Or how did I, there was something in here for you that God had for you, that your willingness to yield to wisdom gave you those, made those connections for you. So from a practical standpoint, got to start with honesty. You got to start with realizing that you need to understand your capacity for a relationship. You can't be quick to get into something when you're coming out of something, right? You need some time away from those things. Remember, we talked about last week, you don't need to be an orangutan, going from one to the next time where you've stopped. You're alone. You're quiet with your thoughts and reflective of these other areas. And during that time of being alone, this is when you're examining these things that you've got to give account to. And the way you think about it is, just imagine everything you've got going on. There's going to come a point where you've got to tell another person these details. So you're working on your story. right? You're working on the way I communicate where I've been, and hopefully you're able to point a person to what you've worked on so that you can have a different outcome, right? And so my time away from the past is for me to focus on my growth and development, and so that I can look to have a different result from these situations I've had in my past. And here's the thing: it's a long game, man. We're playing a long game. We're not trying to, make a quick move. We're playing a long game. And that long game is going to require us to make micro decisions that are going to impact us in the future. And God's faithful. You know what I'm saying? He's faithful to walk with us. I'm a living example that God will hold your hand and walk you through the fire, right? He's not waiting for you to qualify for his help. He's there to be manifest in your weakness. And so learning that and just trusting that God is with us should give us a confidence to just lean into him and lean into the desire to put ourselves around people that can help us, support us, and help push us into the right direction so we can start seeing fruitfulness in our life.
Yeah, man, that is so powerful. And this has been a great show, Deshaun. And I'm sure that men and women alike who listen to this are going to want to hear more from you, how they can access what you do. I know you talked about being a mentor and a counselor and stuff like that. So talk to our listeners about how they can get in touch with you, by website, social media, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Best place I think is Instagram. Think Deshaun at Think Deshaun. Is where we kind of put most of our material. We got some different things that are coming out soon that's going to allow us to have more of a platform to consistently communicate. I'm just looking for ways to be an inspiration to people, because a lot of times people get stuck behind their last mistake, or even the success stagnates you. So I just want to create stories through the things we say, the products that we create, that continue to stimulate that journey, so that, because we're all on a journey, so this is all a process. So follow me on Instagram. I think that'll be a good place to kind of stay connected to the different things we're doing.
Absolutely, man. We'll appreciate that. And to our listeners, before we wrap up, let me leave you with this. You don't get the life you want. You get the life you're prepared for. You don't get the love you desire. You get the love you're disciplined enough to sustain. You see, qualification isn't about perfection. It's about ownership. It's about emotional maturity. It's about character development when nobody's watching. So if you're frustrated with where you are, don't just look outward. Ask yourself, am I qualified for what I'm asking God for? Because growth isn't glamorous, but it is very necessary. This concludes another episode of The Lifeline with your host, Barry J. Elliott, Lindsberg Petway, and yours truly, Bo Powell, along with our guest, Deshaun Davis. We're on a mission to bring light and life into the places people don't always talk about. So stay with us, join the conversation, and let us hear from you, because the Lifeline exists to speak life into your life. Real brothers, real life, real conversation. Y'all take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with host, business expert, and life coach Bo Powell, social media influencer and entrepreneur Lindsberg Petway, and leadership coach and mental health advocate Barry J. Elliott. Join us next week for another impactful conversation on The Lifeline. God bless.